The dojo door slammed open with a force that made the wooden floorboards shudder beneath everyone's feet. Heavy footsteps struck the worn planks, each impact deliberate, demanding attention. The quiet murmur of evening practice sessions dissolved into tense silence as heads turned toward the entrance. A floorboard near the mirrors creaked too loud, as if the building itself held its breath. This story reveals how 30 seconds of perfect timing can speak louder than years of training, and why the greatest strength sometimes lies in what we choose not to do. The caretaker's broom froze mid-sweep near the wall where shadows gathered. Steam rose faintly from the small kettle on the low bench, the only sound now audible in the suddenly charged atmosphere. Through the wall mirrors, he watched bodies shifting, turning toward the disruption that had just entered their sacred space. The evening light filtering through the high windows caught particles of dust suspended in the air, each mote seeming to pause as the room's energy shifted. This particular training hall had witnessed thousands of hours of disciplined practice. Students arrived each evening after long days of regular work, seeking something their ordinary lives couldn't provide. Construction workers, shop clerks, office employees, they came to this modest space on the third floor of an aging building, climbing narrow stairs that announced each footfall to anyone listening above or below. The caretaker had been watching over this space for nearly a decade. Each morning, he unlocked the heavy wooden door, swept the floors clean of yesterday's efforts, arranged the practice equipment along the walls, and filled the small kettle that provided tea for those who stayed late. Each evening, he reversed this ritual, ensuring the space remained ready for the next day's seekers. But this evening felt different from the moment he had turned the key. The air carried a tension that seemed to precede the challenger's arrival, as if the building itself sensed approaching confrontation. The challenger stood framed in the doorway, shoulders squared, fists already clenched. His voice cut through the silence with practiced aggression. "I want a real test," he announced, scanning the room until his eyes found their target. "No more dancing around. No more movie tricks." His stance spoke of someone accustomed to being taken seriously, to having his challenges answered with immediate respect or immediate violence. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, built like a dedicated street fighter. His clothes were practical: loose pants, a simple shirt that wouldn't restrict movement. But his presence carried something beyond mere physical preparation. This was someone who had spent years building his reputation on the ability to impose his will through direct confrontation. The caretaker recognized the type immediately. Hong Kong in the early 1980s produced many such men, skilled fighters who had learned their craft in back alleys and underground tournaments, who measured their worth by their ability to defeat respected opponents in front of witnesses. Jackie's response came not through words, but through stillness. His shoulders remained loose, his breathing measured and calm. While others in the room tensed, preparing for confrontation, he simply looked at the challenger with eyes that seemed to be listening rather than judging. The caretaker noticed how Jackie's feet stayed planted, how he made no move to square up like a street fighter would. The contrast between the two men became immediately apparent to everyone watching. The challenger radiated tension, his muscles visibly coiled, his breathing sharp and controlled in the manner of someone preparing for immediate combat. Jackie, by comparison, appeared almost casual, as if the intrusion had done nothing more than pause a conversation about the weather. A wooden clapper hung silent near the practice timer, its surface worn smooth by countless training sessions. The device was simple: two pieces of hardwood connected by a leather cord, designed to mark rhythm for forms and exercises. Tonight, it remained still, but its presence seemed to remind everyone of the discipline that normally governed this space. The challenger's breathing was sharp, audible, feeding on the energy of witnesses who had gathered to watch what they assumed would be a demonstration of power. Students who had been practicing forms against the mirrors now stood along the walls, their routines forgotten. The caretaker could see the anticipation in their faces, the hunger for spectacle that seemed to accompany any promise of confrontation. But the moment stretched longer than comfort usually allowed. Most challenges in training halls followed predictable patterns: heated words, immediate engagement, quick resolution. This pause felt different, as if time itself had become a participant in what was unfolding. The caretaker had seen this pattern countless times before. Hot pride entering the training hall, demanding satisfaction, looking for reputation built on another man's defeat. Young fighters, middle-aged men seeking to prove points about their lost youth, occasionally even older practitioners, hoping to demonstrate that experience still counted for something. The challenger stepped forward, his weight shifting to the balls of his feet, muscles coiling for what he believed would be a decisive first strike. His hands opened and closed, fingers adjusting their grip on emptiness, preparing to form fists that would carry his reputation forward or destroy it entirely. In the corner, the small kettle continued its gentle whisper of steam. The caretaker noticed how this ordinary sound seemed amplified in the charged silence, how even the building's normal settling creaks appeared to pause in deference to the tension. Jackie waited one beat longer than the challenger expected. In that pause, something fundamental shifted in the room's energy. The caretaker could feel it, the way the very air seemed to hold its breath, waiting for violence that somehow never quite materialized. It was as if the expected script had been handed to actors who had decided to improvise instead. The pause extended beyond psychological comfort into something approaching ceremony. Students along the walls found themselves holding their breath without realizing it. The mirrors, usually filled with moving forms and flowing techniques, now reflected stillness and potential energy. When movement finally came, it arrived not as explosion, but as whisper. The challenger launched his attack with the confidence of someone accustomed to immediate results. His first strike, a straight punch aimed at Jackie's center line, carried the full force of his reputation behind it. The technique was solid, practiced, the kind of attack that had likely ended dozens of previous confrontations before they could truly begin. But Jackie shifted a fraction, just enough to let the force pass beside his shoulder. No dramatic block, no thunderous impact, no counterstrike. Simply an absence where the challenger expected resistance. The punch found only empty air, carrying its owner slightly forward with momentum that suddenly had nowhere to go. The challenger's second attack followed immediately, a hooking motion designed to catch Jackie as he supposedly retreated from the first strike. Again, Jackie simply wasn't where the attack expected to find him. Not dramatically elsewhere, not obviously dodging, just slightly absent from the trajectory of force. The pattern repeated 3 more times in rapid succession. Each attack was technically sound. Each carried genuine power. Each should have forced some kind of engagement, yet each found nothing but air and opportunity for the challenger to question his own targeting. The crowd's expectation broke like a snapped wire. They had come to witness impact, clash, the satisfying sound of technique meeting technique. Instead, they found themselves watching silence and footwork, attention sharpening as they tried to understand what they were seeing. The caretaker observed how the students' faces changed during these first exchanges. Initial excitement gave way to confusion, then to a growing fascination with something none of them had seen before. They were watching combat, but combat redefined. From his position near the wall, the caretaker heard the wooden clapper tap once against the practice timer, moved by some subtle air current in the room. The sound seemed to reset something in Jackie's movement pattern. He didn't respond to the challenger's emotion or urgency. He moved on the beat, on the rhythm, letting the other man chase timing that stayed perpetually one step ahead. This wasn't the flashy choreography of film combat, with its exaggerated movements designed for camera angles and dramatic effect. This was something older, more fundamental. The application of principles that turned aggression into a form of dancing with shadows. The challenger increased his pace, throwing combinations that would have overwhelmed most opponents. His left hand led with a jab, meant to set up a devastating right cross. His footwork showed real training, weight distribution that should have enabled rapid direction changes, stances that promised explosive power in multiple directions. But each successive attack met the same response: minimal movement, perfect positioning, and an angle that transformed aggression into empty air. Jackie's defense required no effort that observers could see, no strain or struggle. He appeared to be conserving energy while his opponent steadily expended his own. The caretaker noticed how Jackie's breathing remained steady throughout the exchange. No huffing, no visible exertion, no signs of the cardiovascular stress that typically accompanied even defensive fighting. Meanwhile, the challenger's breathing was becoming labored, not entirely from physical effort, but from the psychological strain of fighting something that refused to be fought. Power, the caretaker understood from his years of observation, needed something solid to land against. It required resistance to define itself, opposition to justify its existence. Jackie offered neither. He provided no wall to break against, no force to overcome, no enemy to defeat. This was perhaps the most unsettling aspect of what was unfolding. The challenger hadn't been humiliated or overpowered. He hadn't been countered or defeated in any conventional sense. He had simply been made irrelevant. His aggression transformed into a conversation with his own shadow. "What are you doing?" The challenger's voice carried a new quality now, frustration mixed with something approaching panic. His breathing had become audibly labored, not from physical exertion alone, but from the confusion of fighting shadows, of engaging an opponent who refused to be engaged. "Fight me properly." The words echoed in the training hall, bouncing off mirrors that reflected two figures locked in the strangest combat any of the witnesses had ever seen. One man attacking with increasing desperation, the other responding with what appeared to be elaborate indifference. The kettle's gentle hiss seemed to provide an answer before Jackie spoke. Steam continued rising in delicate spirals, marking time in a space where normal time seemed to have paused. When Jackie finally responded, his voice carried the same calm tone he might use to discuss the evening weather with a neighbor. "This is proper fighting," he said, the words delivered without mockery or condescension. "Fighting means ending the conflict, not feeding it." The statement hung in the air like incense, settling over the witnessed confrontation with the weight of something fundamental being revealed. Students along the walls found themselves reconsidering every assumption they had brought to their training about the nature of combat, about the purpose of martial arts, about what it meant to win. The challenger's confusion was visible in his stance. His guard remained up, his fists still clenched, but his body language had begun to communicate uncertainty rather than aggression. "But you're not even," he started to say, then stopped, apparently unable to articulate exactly what Jackie wasn't doing. "I'm doing everything," Jackie replied quietly. "I'm ending this without anyone getting hurt. I'm preserving your dignity while protecting mine. I'm solving the problem you brought here without creating new problems for anyone else." The caretaker watched this exchange with the fascination of someone witnessing a master class in something he had never seen taught. In all his years of maintaining training halls, watching fighters of every level and style, he had never observed conflict resolution conducted at this level of sophistication. The challenger threw one more combination, this time with desperation rather than strategy. His attacks had become wider, less controlled, more desperate to connect with something solid. Jackie demonstrated what the caretaker later described as the cleanest redirect he had ever witnessed. No pain, no show of dominance, no humiliation. Simply a movement that guided the challenger's momentum in a gentle circle, leaving him standing exactly where he had started, confused but completely uninjured. The redirect was so subtle that several students missed it entirely. One moment, the challenger was throwing a punch with his full body weight behind it. The next, he was standing still, his balance perfect, his stance uncompromised, but his aggression somehow completely dissipated. "Your technique has real power," Jackie said, his voice carrying genuine respect rather than the false courtesy that often accompanied victory. "Power needs proper direction. Let me show you where that direction can lead." What followed was not the humiliation that typically concluded training hall challenges, but something unprecedented. Instruction offered in the immediate aftermath of confrontation. Jackie began working with the same movements the challenger had used for attack, demonstrating how they could be refined for precision rather than destruction, for control rather than chaos. The room's tension dissolved like salt in warm water, as witnesses realized they were no longer watching a fight, but participating in an impromptu lesson about the deeper purposes of martial arts training. Students who had expected to see dominance displayed instead found themselves learning about redirection, timing, and the conversion of aggressive energy into something constructive. The caretaker swept the same spot on the floor repeatedly during this unexpected teaching session, his attention divided between his routine maintenance and the education unfolding before him. In his years of maintaining training spaces, he had seen countless demonstrations of physical strength, speed, and technical skill. But this was something qualitatively different. Strength that required no flexing, no display, no proof beyond its own obvious presence. The challenger's transformation during the next hour proved as remarkable as the brief confrontation that preceded it. The man who had entered demanding satisfaction left walking beside Jackie toward the evening market. Their conversation focused on philosophy and technique, rather than dominated by the bitter silence that typically accompanied defeat. Other students watched this departure with something approaching awe. The challenger hadn't been beaten. He had been converted. His aggression hadn't been crushed. It had been redirected toward learning. His pride hadn't been destroyed. It had been educated about more sophisticated ways to express itself. As the training hall slowly returned to its normal evening rhythms, with students resuming their individual practice and the sounds of disciplined movement gradually replacing the charged silence of confrontation, the caretaker continued his routine work with a growing understanding of what he had witnessed. From his corner near the practice equipment, surrounded by the tools and traditions of martial arts training, he grasped something fundamental about the nature of true mastery. Timing, he realized with growing conviction, was more than a technical skill. It was a form of mercy that ended conflicts without creating enemies, demonstrated mastery without requiring humiliation, and taught lessons that victory through force could never provide. The small kettle continued its gentle whisper as evening settled over Hong Kong. Steam rose in patterns that reminded the caretaker of incense in temples, of prayers offered for wisdom rather than victory. The wooden floorboards settled back into their familiar creaks and groans, marking the rhythms of ordinary practice rather than extraordinary confrontation. The mirrors reflected practitioners who moved with perhaps a little more awareness, a little more attention to the spaces between techniques, a little more understanding that the highest levels of martial arts involved not just what to do, but what not to do. From his corner near the practice equipment, the caretaker understood what he had witnessed. Timing, he realized, was a form of mercy. It ended conflicts without creating enemies. It demonstrated mastery without humiliation. It taught lessons that victory through force never could. As evening settled over Hong Kong, The small kettle continued its gentle whisper, steam rising in the warm air. The wooden floorboards settled back into their familiar creaks and groans. The mirrors reflected practitioners who moved with perhaps a little more awareness, a little more attention to the spaces between techniques. But a question lingered in the caretaker's mind as he prepared to lock the training hall for the night. If timing could dissolve a challenge in this safe space, among friends and students who understood restraint, what would happen when the same principle faced real danger? When the wooden floors became concrete, the practice weapons became real ones, and the stakes rose beyond pride to survival itself? That answer would come months later, on a film set where one mistimed step could mean injury or death, where Jackie's understanding of perfect timing would face its ultimate test. But that night in the training hall, the lesson stood complete. Sometimes the greatest power lies not in what we can do, but in what we choose not to do. The last light faded from the mirrors as the caretaker turned the lock, but the memory of those 30 seconds would remain. 30 seconds when timing spoke louder than violence, when wisdom proved stronger than strength, and when a master showed that true martial arts begin not with the first strike, but with the wisdom to know when no strike is needed at all.